This episode was entirely for the fans. No baseball, not much plot advancement, just a whole bunch of callbacks. The first scene we get is the stalker scene that we see in a lot of Adachi stories. Otomi gets stalked by Nishimura, who is then goaded by Akari to go and save Otomi from the boy that she's talking to. This ends up attracting a whole crowd of boys who go to quote-unquote save Otomi. We see this scene in Touch, we see it in H2, and I think we see it best in Cross Game, where the tables kind of turn on our heroes. No one drives Otomi out of this situation here. Otomi just ends up picking up a whole bunch of stalkers and bringing them back home. Speaking of fans, Doma gets a fan letter from someone that we recognized. It's Haruka, who's just recently moved into the neighborhood, essentially asking Doma out on a date. It's a very old-fashioned method with love letters and secret messages, and I think the story is self-aware enough to know that this is a ridiculous premise, so they just pile on the cheese and make it as ridiculous as possible. Essentially, this entire story is just the creator making fun of his own cliches. All of this is just to remind you of every time that it happened in previous stories, and even if it doesn't remind you of when it happened in previous stories, the writer is very happy to just shout out the names of stories that he's already written. When Haruka and Doma go out on their date, the first thing that Haruka says is Hiatari Ryoko, which is translated as "what a beautiful day," but is also the name of a series that Adachi wrote. They seem to go a very long distance for not very much payoff when their date ends up at a waterfall. And it turns out that Haruka was just trying to scratch a curiosity that she had when she was 3 years old and she first visited that waterfall. It's a very stupid reason to go so far out on a date like this, but it's really just used as an excuse to introduce the idea that Haruka and Doma have known each other since they were 3 years old. This is confirmed by Haruka's father when he visits with all of Otomi's stalkers in the Tachibana household. He says that at Doma's mother's funeral, Doma really wasn't understanding that he had lost his mother and was just playing around amongst all the mourners as if it were just another day. It took Haruka to throw a soda in his face to make him cry and realize the gravity of the situation. Haruka's father thinks that Doma may have been Haruka's first love, and this eats at Soichiro, who has a crush on Haruka, and it might also eat at Otomi, who claims that Haruka may have beaten her to Doma's heart since they met when they were 3, and Otomi and Doma met when she was 5. But this is a love triangle for another day because it's not even clear that Doma's that interested in pursuing Haruka. The date goes pretty swimmingly, neither positively or negatively in one direction. But they do end up getting lost, which is another part of the cliched stories that Adachi uses. And I think the writers understood that this sort of scenario wouldn't happen today because most people have cell phones, and that is something that can rescue them from a situation like this. But here comes the self-awareness again when both characters look at each other and dumbfoundingly realizes that neither of them owns a cell phone. And I think Haruka mentioned something along the lines of, how strange that 2 high school kids in this day and age don't have cell phones. There isn't much terribly to react to plot-wise in this episode. It looks like it will continue into next week with the cliffhanger that we see at the end. But otherwise, this was just a callback episode for the fans to make them warm and fuzzy with their nostalgia. It is nice that I can watch this show without having to look for any sort of plot holes or poorly animated scenes or things that I would otherwise look for in a worse show. It's just really well done and really easy to watch, and even if this episode wasn't my favorite, I didn't mind watching it twice. And I do know story-wise that this is going to pick up, but I'm not going to spoil anything for the non-manga readers, because I myself am a non-manga reader for most of the shows that I watch. Still not sure how long this show is going to go. Right now we're at episode 10. First season tends to last between 11 and 13 episodes. Hopefully this will pick up again in the summer. I guess we'll see when it happens.